was sitting in with a group one time, playing an undead, one who had more of a heroic bent to him than usual. The character was a necropolitan from the Libris Mortis book, and an elven ranger to boot. He had a bad history and was atoning for his past sins by working for the god of death by killing other undead creatures. The dungeon master did not quite get my logic on this, as some beings would fight fire with fire. No matter how many times I explained to him that undead don't need to eat, sleep, or breathe, that neither do I. Therefore, my character was the perfect undead hunter. Also in the group was a lawful evil magus, who's pretty much the center of this story, as he wanted to go out and conquest and eventually subjugate the world under his rule and create an empire. Our third party member was a sorcerer who was completely, for lack of better words, batshit crazy. The sorcerer and I pranked the magus relentlessly, but about 95% of the pranks were all me. I would also prank him both in and out of game. The out of game pranks were simple. I would pass a note to the GM. Sometimes the note would say something simple. I mess with an item of his, and when he utilizes that item, he will find that there would be a hole cut in the bottom of the bag. Or I would pass a note to the GM that says, "Look at X player, nod, smile, and continue game please." I always had him wondering what I was up to in that regard. But in character, my pranks were all over the place, to the point where I would leap out of the darkness at him when he was least expecting it and yell boo. Well, kind of shriek like an undead monstrosity, really. I would also unstake his tent while he slept and rotate it 180 degrees. So when he woke up in the morning, he would be disoriented. Or even go so far as in the middle of the night leave camp while I was supposed to be on watch, hunt down some goats, bring them back, and decorate his bedside stuff with entrails. He was especially angry when I took it upon myself to buy about a pound of seasoning for poultry and sprinkle it on his axe beak when he wasn't looking. He really did like that mount. My pranks also included other things, like showering him with vegetables, creeping up on him while he slept to make him more nervous, or generally making very liberal use of the alarm spell, which was predominantly my go-to. I would cast alarm on his saddlebags, I would cast alarm on his belt buckle, alarm on his tent flap, wherever I could get away with it. He eventually caught on to this and would get up in the morning, try on his boots very carefully, mess with his belt very carefully, and so on down the line. Eventually the alarm would go off when he would put on, say, his left boot, and he would hear a roaring lion, and at the end of it he would be like, "Oh ha ha, you got me, you dick." Well, this kept on for many months in-game time, so nearly every night he had been going through constant aggravation thanks to me. Whenever I got the chance to prank him, I would do it. I would yell there was a fire when there wasn't a fire, yell that there was no enemies coming when there were enemies coming, and pretty much just be a general douchebag. After all, if he was going to be a warlord, in my opinion, he was going to need to learn how to control his temper when dealing with problems both in and out of his empire. Well, this culminated one time to an excellent moment when my prank went off in a way most unexpected. After casting alarm on one of his items, I passed a note to the GM, and we continued on our merry way into a town. Lo and behold, while traveling through town in the market, a street urchin had bumped into him. He immediately checks his coin pouch, and sure enough, it is missing. So he gives chase. The chase goes on for about 10 to 15 minutes in real time as he's rounding corners, leaping over people, and generally just trying to get his money back. Eventually, the street urchin ducks into a nearby tavern, which he also enters into. The street urchin, by the time he has entered the tavern, has disappeared somewhere, yet he notices a group of mercenaries sitting over at one of the tables. They're wearing clothing somewhat similar to the street urchin, so it suddenly becomes an idea of his that these mercenaries are in league with the street urchin. Perhaps the street urchin is collecting money to pay them off for other things, but whatever, he wants his money back. So he walks up to the table like he owns the entire tavern and demands they give him his money back. The mercenaries rebuke the magus. Again, he reiterates his stance that he wants his money back, and if they don't pay up, they will pay for it. The mercenaries narrow their eyes at him, and they get ready for a throwdown. The magus once again demands his money. The mercenaries, in kind, tell him to shove off because there are more of them than there are him, and they will make sure that he regrets trying to challenge them. The magus begins burning a spell in one hand, illuminating the tavern with a fiery light, and then throws his dice for an intimidation check as he gives a short speech to make them regret him challenging him, to make them back down. The guards are mostly intimidated by this, but one of them still has a bit of spine to him and decides to stand up, which provokes the Magus into drawing his blade. I'm sitting over in the corner watching this all go down from my vantage point when I gently just make a quick coughing noise to get the GM's attention. He looks at me a little bit confused and a little out of sorts since I'm interrupting a potential combat scene. I remind him of a note that I handed him about an hour previously. The GM gets a moment of recognition on his face, double checks the note, looks back at the player, and then says, "I'm sorry, dude. Things have gone from very good in the Magus's favor to very bad." As the Magus, standing there, had made his intimidation check, the moment of triumph had pretty much gone to hell as the Magus had drawn his blade, for I had cast alarm on his scabbard earlier. In his efforts to intimidate these men and have to fight only one of them rather than three, all went to hell rather fast, as everyone within a 60-foot radius heard my alarm spell go off. It was the sound of a baby whining at high volume.